It's 10:45 is what the clock on the microwave reads as he walks into the door and puts his keys on top of the kitchen counter. There's one light that's left on in the house. It's so that he can navigate his way through all the building blocks, through all the Barbie dolls, through all the Transformers. She just didn't have the energy tonight to pick them all up. After getting the kids from school, making dinner, struggling with third grade math homework, pretending to be Megatron, running the sound for the Hannah Montana concert, getting them in the bath and into the bed, she just didn't have the energy. It's been 5 days of this routine. He's been gone. He walks into the master bedroom and there she lays in the bed asleep, finally resting. He goes on into the master bedroom and slowly opens the door. Master bath, so he slowly opens the door. He's got to be careful because there's a squeak in it that he hasn't got around to fixing yet, but he takes his shower and comes back and slowly and quietly climbs into his side of the bed. The next morning, they finally get to see each other over coffee in the kitchen. He sits at the counter. She brings him a cup of coffee and she said, "How'd it go last night?" "Not good. Not good again. I don't know what I'm going to do, honey. I don't know how I can put up with this. I don't know how much longer I can put up with these people. I just don't think I'm the right person for this job. I swear we spent 2 hours in this meeting of them fussing and talking about whether or not I should wear a tie when I preach. They're so steeped in this tradition. And if I hear one more story about how back in 1945, their grandpa was the founding pastor of this church and how their uncle gave the land for the church to be built on. And if I hear another time how the family would just be rolling over in their grave if they knew that we weren't using hymnals for the worship, I just don't know if I can take it anymore. This week or today earlier, I went to lunch with the chairman of the Benevolence Committee, the Benevolence Committee, and he gave a 50-cent tip for an $18 meal. I left $20 for the young waitress and a card to the counselor at the church because of how badly he treated her over bringing him unsweetened tea. They are so mean. They lie about everything. I don't know how much longer I can put up with it. She's heard this story 10 times in the past year. And she says, "Well, we better hurry up and get ready for work. The kids are going to be up pretty soon." And so he grabs his cup of coffee, and just as he's sliding it across the counter, he notices his phone is vibrating. His first thought is, "Oh no, before 8 o'clock, something again?" And on the phone, there's a name of a welcomed and familiar person in his life, Paul. If you will, open up your Bibles to Titus, the little book of Titus. We're going to read 4 words from a man named Paul in a letter that he wrote, a phone call that he made to a young pastor that he had been mentoring named Titus. 4 words that I pray helps us and transitions us into this new series of seasons. If you're physically able to stand for the reading of God's word, I'm going to ask that you would this morning. We're going to read Titus chapter 2, verse 1, 4 little words. "But as for you," let's pray. Father, we come to you this morning, open Bibles and open hearts and open lives. And God, we ask you, Lord, that you would help us understand this season that we're in our life, whatever that is, and how we are to apply. But as for us, God, I ask you for the gifts of teaching and preaching. Those are heavenly gifts that you possess and that you can give. And I pray, God, that you would grant them, Lord, and that we would receive them with joy and that they would transform our lives. And God, I pray that you would take today and help us to be mentors in someone else's life. Help us to be mentored and help us to see the gospel in all of it. For the glory of your name, we pray, Lord, for your glory. Amen. You guys can be seated. We're coming out of the series of Titus, where Paul wrote a letter to a young man who was in ministry that he had ministered to, that he had mentored along in the faith. And as I was studying and reading this letter the past few weeks, I got to thinking about something. Got to thinking about, why did Paul write this letter to Titus? When you look at the other letters that Paul wrote in the New Testament, Corinthians, Thessalonica, and some of these other letters, there's usually some reason why Paul's writing it. There's a problem that's going on in that church, and Paul's wanting to address it, so he writes to them. And in Titus, it's a little bit different. So I started to look at this, and I was like, Paul, why did you write this to him? What was the occasion? Did Paul hear, perhaps in his imprisonment or some time in between, did he hear that the problems that were going on in Crete and he wanted to write? Or was it just that Paul was mentoring Titus and he had a relationship with him and he loved him so much that he just knew of what was going on in ministry and had this feeling that he ought to call, that he ought to write to him and let him know? And as I was thinking about that, I started thinking about you. Started thinking about the need for a Paul in your life. How awesome it is to have a Paul, someone to mentor us, someone to be with us, someone to walk with us in the seasons of our lives, to help us and to point us to Christ and to help us see the gospel in all of it. How wonderful it was for Titus to have a Paul in this season. Seasons in our lives, guys, are these specified or unspecified times. Sometimes we know when they're going to end, sometimes we don't know, but seasons are usually associated with some kind of change that's occurring, right? Whether it's sports, whether it's baseball season or football season or whatever sports season, or if it's hunting season or fishing season or whatever it is, if it's the seasons that we experience just in life of winter, spring, summer, and fall, we know that things are changing, that there's a beginning and that there's a middle period, and then sometimes we're praying that there's an end to that. But we all understand that there's seasons in our lives. Solomon knew that when he wrote that there's a season for everything. There's a time for everything that's under the sun. But how much do we need? How much do you need a Paul? Someone to help you in those seasons of your life. And for you to be a Paul to someone else. So that's what I want us to look at today, is the importance of having a godly mentor in your life, of being a godly mentor in someone else's life, and the centrality of the gospel in both of those, and how needful they are. First off, the importance of having a mentor. Mentorship, this is kind of a new term that's came about in the last 10 years. When I was growing up, we called it discipleship, and there's some nuances between mentoring and discipleship and life coaching and spiritual coaching and all this good things. But Webster's dictionary says that, a mentor is someone who teaches someone, gives them advice, helps them, usually someone who's experienced or older, to help someone younger along. But I didn't think that was a very good nor an adequate definition of mentoring. So I go to our expert on staff, Chandler Young, on mentoring, and Chandler gave me his definition for mentoring, and I thought it was spot on. So I'll share it. Chandler got him a quote today, and it says this: mentoring is an open book and an open life. How wonderful. Someone just to sit down and open the book with you and to open their life with you, to see what God's doing in it, for the purpose of equipping, empowering, releasing, and sending out believers to accomplish the mission that God has called them to. That's mentoring. It's a new word in the church, and especially with younger generations that we're finding. I did a recent study in Lifeway, or looked at a Lifeway study, and it said this. It said the emerging generations recognize almost naturally that they have a lot to learn, and the Bible affirms a relationship model that can be used to meet that need. It's a new term that we're using, but it's an old concept. This has been going on for a long time. It's Bible to have a mentor. If it's Jethro with Moses. Jethro was Moses' father-in-law, and he sat down with him and he said, look, you're an idiot for doing what you're doing here. That was what my mentor did with me. The affectionate term was, you're an idiot, and I'm not. Usually that was my dad. But Jethro sits down with him and he said, you're crazy for trying to do all this on your own and hear all this stuff. What you need to do is you need to train others to do this, okay? And to divvy out this. So we see that there. We see Moses is a mentor to Joshua. Eli is a mentor to Samuel. Samuel to Saul. Naomi to Ruth. Elijah to Elisha. Mordecai to Esther. And of course, Jesus with his disciples, 12, 3, and sometimes one-on-one in this mentoring relationship. And of course, we see today with Paul and Titus and also with Timothy. It's Bible to have a mentor. It's Bible to be a mentor. It's a biblical thing that we ought to follow. And when you look at the Bible's model of what a mentor does, it's someone who's there to give wise counsel, not give you all the answers. If you're meeting with someone and they give you all the answers, run from them. Okay, because you don't want somebody to give you answers. You want somebody that's going to impart to you wisdom. They're going to impart to you how God works in things, not give you the answers. I learned that long ago, especially being a pastor, is when someone comes to me, and if I'm the one who has all the answers, my phone blows up because I'm the one with the answers, instead of their Bibles opening up so that they can find out what God has for them. In the Bible, we see mentoring is someone who's going to be a godly example of grace, not someone that has everything figured out, not someone that's perfect, but a godly example of a grace-filled person, someone who has an open and transparent life, someone who takes time and invests in others, someone who sees potential in someone and then empowers them and entrusts them to go do ministry, someone that confronts and challenges another, someone who prays for and with that person. And of course, we see the biblical model as someone who always constantly points you back to Christ. Points you back to the gospel in your life. And that's why, guys, these 4 words in Titus gripped me as I was studying this. I couldn't get away from it. But as for you, and isn't that what a good mentor should do? They should tell you the whole world's doing this. Everybody else views it this way. But as for you, no. But as for us, no. Right? And those 4 words should be from somebody who can, I call it, can feel your pulse. I was reading some of these studies on mentoring, and one of the things that was alarming to me that I found out, and I think was alarming to many people, was that most people, when asked, tell me someone who has influenced you in your life, tell me someone who's mentoring you, and they mention authors and online preachers or podcast preachers, instead of someone who's not that those aren't real people, but get this, that they're real people that are in front of you that I call it can feel your pulse. They know whether or not you haven't talked to your wife in 2 weeks. And that relationship strength. Someone who can sit down and feel your pulse and get what's going on in your life. And they know whether you're struggling with X or with Y or with Z and can help mentor you in that. And that's something that I find that is alarming, that we need to make sure that you understand that mentors, these people, should be someone that you're sitting down with face to face, that has contact with you and contact with your life so that they can be more personal and lead you into Christ in that way. I had 2 great mentors in my life. One was not so spiritual, but he taught me how to fish. It was my Uncle Louie. And those were the best words of my life when I was a little kid, was when my mama come in there and she said, Uncle Louie just called. That meant great things were in store for me. I was gonna go fishing like on a boat with real rods and reels. I was gonna go catch big fish. I grew up I'm kind of poor and I didn't have a whole lot of rods and stuff like that, so I would usually use a pole that I would cut down and find some line and a string and go dig up worms and catch little brim in the local pond, and that was my thing to do all the time. But when Uncle Louie called, it meant that we were going to go fish, and every time I went with Uncle Louie fishing, he would always have a rod and reel set up for me, and he would say, that's your rig for today, and you can keep it when you go home. And then he would show me when we would get out there to the water, and he would say, no, it's not time to cast yet. You got to wait for this, and you got to wait for that. And you see that stump over there? He's going to be hiding behind that stump, and you throw that thing over there, and you start popping it, and you make it look like, he would say this, make it look like the real thing. and he taught me how to catch fish, and he put in me a passion and a joy and a love for fishing that I've had with me my entire life. Still do. I love that. Now, I had another mentor in my life who was spiritual. He was there to guide me, and his name was Ronell Owensby. About 25 years ago, I'm teaching Sunday school in a little church up in Lawndale, and Pastor Ronell, he was the pastor of the church at that time. He was new, he was the interim, and he saw something in me. And he started challenging me, and he started asking me about my call in my life. And I started telling him that I thought that I was called to preach since I was a little kid. So he started developing that. And he said, you know what? We don't have an evening service at this church. I think we need to start one. And you're going to preach it. And I thought, well, isn't that convenient for him? You know, he can start the evening service and he don't have to do anything. But he would, every Sunday evenings, I would preach these services to 5 or 10 people sitting in the little thing there. And at the end of those services, he and his wife, Ann, would take me to the back and they would show me sentence structures and conjugate verbs. I still can't spell conjugate, but they would ask me to conjugate verbs and figure out all this. And they would say, look, one of these days, you're going to be preaching in front of doctors and lawyers, and they don't want their kids listening to you say ain't no. And I would say, well, I guess they ain't going to hear me then, because this is the way I'm going to be. But they poured into me. Ronell poured his life into me. He took me on visits with him. He showed me how to do things in ministry and how to care and how to love. But always he instilled in me lost people. It's about lost people, Jeremy. Lost people need Christ, and he always pointed me in that direction. He was there to see the potential in my life, give me opportunities to equip me, to empower me to do those things and to love me through it. He could feel my pulse. There was a lot of times, that little story I shared a while ago, that little intro, that's me. That's me walking into my house many times. And out of the blue, right? You ever heard that expression? Out of the blue, I'd look on my phone and it would say Ronell instead of Paul. And he would say, I just had you on my heart. I just had you on my mind, and I think thought I needed to call you. And it would be at just the right time. Ronell passed away a few years ago, and I miss seeing his name on my phone all the time. A lot of times I could use that call from him. Here's what I did, though. I learned that what he had poured into me, I needed to pour into someone else. There's the importance of being a mentor in someone's life. I love this phrase from Andy Stanley. He says this: you are not responsible for filling someone up, but you are responsible for pouring yourself out. What has been poured into you, and what has been poured into us, guys, we must pour it out into someone else. Paul taught this to his young mentors, Timothy and Titus. In 2 Timothy, he says this, and what you have heard from me, Paul talking, in the presence of many witnesses, I want you to entrust this to faithful men who will be able to teach others. He's saying, what I poured into you, you need to pour into somebody else so that they can pour into somebody else. That's multiplication. That's how the gospel grows. That's how we grow. You pass it along. So I'm going to ask you a question. Who are you mentoring? I don't care how old you are in this room. Whether you have a gray hair, no hair, or you have just some amazing locks. I don't know. Whoever you are, who are you mentoring? Who is it that you're pulling along in your life to tell them you have something to offer? Now, many of you may have objections right now, and you're telling me, no, can't do that. I've kind of disqualified myself because I did X or I did Y or I did Z, right? Let me remind you of something. The Apostle Paul was a murderer. A murderer. The man standing before you right now spent time in jail because I was a drunk. God can use, he desires to use you in your life. And maybe, just maybe, he desires to use your past failures and successes to mentor someone. I found something about this generation that I think is so awesome. Number one, it's awesome that they are seeking out someone to mentor them. But I think that it's awesome that they love the fact that they don't want someone perfect in front of them. They want someone who's real. Someone who has learned from those failures and how Jesus has brought them through it. in the seasons of their life. Guys, we can take whatever season that we're in life, whatever season that we've been through, and we can see what God has done and we can help someone that's coming along. Some of you guys have been married for 5 years and you think you're just a novice at it. Well, guess what? Somebody's been married for 5 months and they would love to learn from you, how to navigate those financial challenges, those sexual incompatibility things that you find out when you're married. They would love to see someone, have someone teach them how to navigate what it looks like to start saving. Some of you guys have been married for 50 years. Okay, and you know what it's like to go through that affair and to see Jesus bring you through it. You know what that's like. And that doesn't disqualify you. In fact, it may give you the qualification to be able to stand in front and say, this is how God had done it. Some of you guys have had children that have went on to college, and you know what it's like to send some kid to college. Some of you guys have known what it's like to struggle with that prodigal that's never come home. Some of you guys have know how to navigate the middle school years. I have a son that's that's 12 years old that's going to middle school. I don't know what I'm doing. I need serious help. I was praying for a guy this week, and I thought, man, we're in the same boat. We've got children the same age. No wonder he and I are meeting together because we've got to help each other through this. I've been looking in the Bible for middle school, and I think I found it in the apocalyptic books because it is like the craziest thing ever that's going on there. But you guys have been through that, and you know, please help. Use that and to mentor someone along. Some of you guys have struggled with sexuality. You know what it's like to struggle with homosexuality. Some of you guys have struggled with whether or not to stay pure. Some of you guys have failed in that. Some of you guys have succeeded in that. Pour into someone that's behind you to help them along to see what that looks like. Some of you guys have experienced conflict in work. You've experienced conflict in family. You know what that's like to navigate that and to see how God can bring you through that. Some of you guys were in education. You got all A's and you knew what that was like to get those scholarships and how to weed through which college to go to. Some of you guys are like me and you graduated 171 out of 179. There were 8 people dumber than you in the entire school. But you know what that's like to have to navigate that and have to study it. I was thinking about this in the first service when I was over there worshiping God, and I was thinking, I am the guy who graduated, 170, that's no joke, 171 out of 179, and I have a master's degree of divinity, a 96-hour degree. I have a degree in history. I have an education degree. How did that happen? It's because Jesus wanted to use me, and he did that in me. You're the same. Use and leverage the experiences that you have had in your life, the failures and yes, the successes. Leverage them for the glory of God to point to Christ because that's what we do. Everyone else in the world uses all of those things for them, but not as for you. Not as for us. We leverage them for the glory of God. So I'm going to ask you, what will you do with your life? If you don't leverage your life and mentor someone else, it will die with you. You don't pass it along to anyone. Andy Stanley, love this quote here. He says, the value of a life is always determined by how much of it is given away. When it's over, it's over. It happens suddenly sometimes. Guys, get involved. Mentor someone. They crave it. They're wanting it. You crave it. You want it. Find someone to mentor you for the glory of God. Could it be, guys, that your past hurts are actually your seminaries and that your struggles are your credentials to get involved in someone else's life to do ministry? Could that be the case? Because let me tell you something. No one wants someone who knows it all, but someone does want someone who is all. And that's the last thing, the centrality of the gospel in both. What made Paul such a great mentor is because he had experienced the grace of God. He knew he was a murderer. And he knew who he was before Christ. And he knew who he was in Christ. He understood grace above everything. Paul constantly reminded his 2 little mentees, Timothy and Titus, about this. In Titus, he said this, "For the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation for all people, training us to renounce ungodliness and worldly passions." How in the world do you renounce ungodly passions and the worldly passions and desires that we have? It's because the gospel. It's the gospel that does it. He tells Timothy in 2 Timothy, he says, "You then, my child, be strengthened by the size of your ministry. Be strengthened by how many people that come to church. Be strengthened by the size of the offering. Be strengthened by how many pat you on the back and tell you a good sermon, boy." No, he says, be strengthened by the grace that is in Christ Jesus. Do you have someone in your life that is constantly reminding you, but for Jesus, there's no but as for you? If not, you need someone that's doing that. Someone that's there, not someone that's telling you, follow your heart. If you have someone that's mentoring you, either that's a book, a podcast, or somebody that you're meeting with eyeball to eyeball that tells you to follow your heart, leave as fast as you can. Put the book down. Your heart, our hearts are deceitfully wicked above all things. Your heart will lead you to a life of sin and death and hell in eternity. Period. We can't follow our hearts, but as for us, we don't follow our heart because I know where it's going to lead me. We follow the heart of Christ because Christ is in us, and when we follow his heart, then it leads to life and eternity in heaven with him forever. We need someone in our lives that are telling us success and joy are not found in your child or you playing in the NFL or in the major leagues or in the NBA. Success and joy is not found in you landing that dream job or getting that bank account or having that dream or landing that dream spouse or having that perfect family. Success and joy are found in nothing but knowing Jesus Christ and making him known. That's what we need in our lives. I love the great hymn, "Because He Lives," written by Bill Gaither. It's probably one of the greatest hymns in the last 100 years written. He knew this all too well. He says, "How sweet to hold a newborn baby and feel the pride and joy he gives." Amen, people that have experienced this. That's awesome, but he knows that it's not all. It's not what we should seek after in life. He says, "But greater still is the calm assurance that this child, no matter what, will face uncertain days because he lives." Because Jesus lives, we can face tomorrow. We can face that past hurt, that hang up and habit. So do you have a Paul in your life? Do you have someone that's there to help you through these rough seasons? Help you through the successes of life? Do you have someone that's just felt like you needed to have someone call and encourage you? I just felt like I needed to call you. I just felt like I needed to write you a letter. I just felt like, do you have someone like that in your life? Are you a Paul in someone else's life? If you're not, let me talk to you. Do not waste your life. Don't let your life die with you. Don't let your past experiences, whether they're failures or successes, die with you. If you're that business person and you've learned how to, raise a business up, or maybe you've been through bankruptcy. If you're one of those people and you have 5 children, or you're someone you just experienced a miscarriage, or you know what it's like to lose a child at 16, do not waste those experiences. Use them to leverage your life for the gospel. I was at a Burns football game a few weeks ago, Burns High School. And my daughter, she's a cheerleader there. She's been a cheerleader since she was in the 6th grade there, and it was her senior year. And I've watched this team come up through the years. And man, this year they were good. They've been good for several years, but this year they were really, really good. And I thought, man, this is going to be the year. They're going to win state championship this year. They've got it. They've got it. Last game, their quarterback couldn't play any, so it was a really close game. That was my excuse for but the quarterback couldn't play, and he didn't play the whole game. And with 1:50 seconds to go, we scored and tied the game 7-7. I thought, here we go. We're going to win it. We're coming back. This team throws a bomb down the field. Kid catches it, 2.4 seconds to go. 40-something yard field goal, and the kicker had just missed the previous field goal. So we're thinking, he's gonna miss it. We're gonna get overtime. We're gonna win this thing. And this kid, like facing the Giants, wind blows, and man, he kicks this thing through the uprights, and the game's over. And I looked on the field, and I saw these little boys that I've watched since the 6th grade on their faces on that field. It's over. And I couldn't help but find myself look up to see, is there a little bit more time? No, it's gone. And I looked down at my daughter, who was, I don't really care if cheerleading's over or not, you know. I don't care if it's, and I saw her sitting down there on her little cheerleading box crying her eyes out because it's gone. It's over. Never put that uniform on again. Anybody know what that feels like? You take that button off and you know, I'll never do this again. It's gone. It's over. Well, guess what, guys? That's going to be our lives. It's going to be all of our lives in here. Not one of us will escape death unless Jesus returns. So what will we do with the time we have? There's no do-overs in it. We can't go back and do it over. Oh, as I was studying this, I thought to myself, man, I would love to go back to my college days and sit down with my 19-year-old self and say, no, boy, don't misuse your singlehood like this. Don't. If I could go back and just tell him, don't you do that with this college year. You could use that to glorify. You could use that to bring so many people. But I can't. But what I can do is I can tell you about it, right? And I don't know what it is in your life that you can't go back and do over, but what you can do is you can mentor someone else through what they're going through. Don't waste your life. Jesus is our perfect example of it. If it's true what Andy Stanley said, that the value of a life is determined by how much it is given away, Jesus poured out everything for you. He poured it out all. Every drop of that blood was for you, so that you could be his child, so that you could be saved, and then use that for his glory and for his name, to share with someone else the grace that God has given. Will you be mentored by someone? Find somebody. Find someone. Give me a call. Give me an email. Find one of the pastors around here. Find anybody and say, look, will you begin to help me through this season of my life? Will you be a mentor to someone? Will you step in there and fill in those gaps and be that thing or that person for someone that's going to be making that call and say, I just thought about you today. All of it means nothing unless Jesus is at the center of it though, right? Let's pray. Father, I love you. I thank you for Ronell Owensby and for him sitting down with me and opening up the word, and for him taking countless phone calls. I thank you. I thank you for his example of work. Thank you for his example of he's going to preach until he has no breath left. Lord, if I could ask many of these people in the room about their mentors in their life, they might not be able to point to someone, but I'm sure it happened. I thank you for them. We thank you for them. And we ask, God, that we would use our lives for the same. And Lord, at the end of it, your name would be glorified no matter what. We love you, Lord Jesus. I can't wait to see what you're going to do. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.